Hello, everyone. Here we are, Jennie of Hidden Path Astrology and Laurie of Astrolore. Together, we are creating Hidden Path Astrology. And today we're going to be working on our Astro-biography series. We're talking about Dolly Parton today. Fascinating chart, fascinating person. Before we dive into this, please take a moment, subscribe to our channel, and like us, share us, do all those good things so that people will find us on the internet. So on with it. How are you, Jennie?
I'm doing pretty well, Laurie. Thank you. It's a pleasure creating these AstroPath videos with you.
Oh, this one's fun, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, Dolly Parton. It's so interesting. We both watched a relatively recent documentary that is on Netflix about Dolly Parton. What's the name of that documentary?
It's called Here I Am.
Here I Am.
It's only an hour and a half. It was a pretty fun watch, actually. Went by pretty quick.
Yeah, it is. And for any of you that are studying astrology and want to really understand this stuff, it is so powerful. If you've got a chart in your hands and watch a documentary about that person's life, you'll learn a lot. So we both watched that, and we're going to talk about her chart today. We're going to try to keep it super simple. There's an awful lot in this chart, as there is in everyone's charts, especially these famous people who have such wild, interesting lives. So we're going to just try to keep it really simple. We start with really talking about the midheaven, which is what we will most know about the person. It's what is really visible to the outer world. So we'll talk about the midheaven, and we'll talk about the ascendant, which is more the personality, how people who individually know Dolly will interact with her. And then we'll talk about some of the key components within the chart.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Let's talk a little bit more about Dolly herself, before we bust out that chart.
Let's do that.
Well, you probably know who Dolly Parton is. She's probably one of the most famous musicians in the world. She's got a whole place, Dollywood, named after her. But it was really cool to check out the documentary. She grew up poor. She's from a family of 12. I think she was the fourth one down. And she knew really early on at like age 10 that she wanted to be a big star. That's how she put it.
Yeah.
And she basically just decided that, and then off she went. It's very interesting. A couple other cool things about her. She's married, but her husband never appears with her in public. So that was something that I didn't know that came to light. And
she's been married forever, right?
Yeah, like they've been married for, I think that since like 1967 or something like that. So, well over 50 years. And he never appears in public. So that's a big mysterious component. Another thing I found out was that she's a super fast songwriter, which we'll talk more about. And she's incredibly prolific. She's written so many songs. And a lot of her songs tell little stories and are actually pretty feminist in their content, even if she herself may not sort of present as a feminist like on the outside face of it. But if you listen to her songs, there are all these little stories about her family and growing up poor and what it's like to be a woman. And it's kind of, I really enjoy it. I enjoy hearing each of her songs. I have a new appreciation from watching the documentary.
Yeah, it is really interesting how her songs so often are these little mini stories about her childhood. And it's fascinating how they talk about how fast she just writes songs. And it's really interesting. Anyone who knows Dolly Parton probably knows that movie 9 to 5. And I love how they talk about how she wrote that song, the song for 9 to 5, which became such a huge song outside of the context of the movie itself. It was like an anthem of the times. And it was so intriguing how she had just gone home after working with, who is it in there? Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda. It was the three of them, right?
Yeah.
The three of them. And she went home and she just wrote that song, doing the music on her fingernails. And that was incorporated into the song itself. And just, her abilities to write songs is just amazing, really amazing.
Yeah.
And how it's tied in, how her and her work tied in so tightly to the culture of the times.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, just her creativity. I think she was sort of strolling around the movie set, and when she came up with that, just sort of hanging around, clicking her fingernails, and that's how it came apart. It was like, oh my God, really? So it was pretty cool. Yeah, well, I'm sure more stuff will come up about
Oh my
her.
God.
So I'm going to show the chart here,
Yeah.
and so we can start talking about the astrology of Dolly.
All right. So yeah, I know we're supposed to start with the midheaven, but I just want to say we just have to just see the creativity right there, the hard work and creativity of that little pocket of planets there in the fifth house. I just had to say that first.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love this chart. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Now we will start
Right here.
now with my little digression. We will start by looking at the midheaven, because this is the career point. This is how the world will encounter this person.
Mhm.
And we've got Gemini on the midheaven and Uranus conjunct the midheaven. So, what are the first ideas that come to your mind when you see just that?
Yeah, I mean, Gemini is the movement of information. So this is all the information that came through her songs. But with Uranus there just makes this this is a person who's going to be a game changer, who's going to impact the culture. Uranus is an outer planet. It's the great awakener. So it's going to disrupt the status quo and bring in this whole new level of energy. It's like the future. So I think in a nutshell, that's what I would say with those two symbols.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, Uranus, just the whole, you think about it as the awakener, and just how she shows up in the world as such an unusual character.
Yeah, I
She
kind of
is,
yeah.
yeah, you think about how she shows up and you notice her
Yeah.
regardless. You look at all this Capricorn, which you think of as being very serious and kind of stoic and conservative, but Dolly's creativity has to show up in the outer world with Uranus right there. So everything is going to wake you up and
Mhm.
make you pay attention.
That's right. I remember thinking a couple times during the movie, I was like, this lady's an alien. She really seems like from the future somehow or from another planet. And I mean, some of that's her presentation, which we'll talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
in a minute when
Well,
we talk
that
about the
is,
Ascendant.
yeah. I mean, that is, and her presentation on the public stage has
Mhm.
to have that. And yeah, Uranus is the alien too. So
Mhm.
that's a great way to think of it. And she's
Yeah.
very, very unusual how she
Yeah.
shows up in the world.
Yeah. The only other thing you might notice about the 10th house is she's also got the North Node in Gemini there. I just want to mention it because it's there. So this just in the simplest terms makes a statement about her career being her path. Like this is the path she should be on.
Right. And if you think about just to take that one tiny step further, and if you know that an awful lot of Dolly's songs are about her family. So it's sort of like the
Mhm.
taking the wisdom, the Sagittarius South Node, the wisdom from the family and bringing it through her voice out into the world. That's really the path.
Yeah, and lifting out of the family history. That makes a statement about that. But instead of just it's actually a beautiful statement of how to use the nodal axis because it's not that she forgot about family, it's in
Right.
fact that she incorporated all of the
Right.
stuff from her upbringing into her career, into her music.
Yeah.
So cool. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we could spin that out further, but let's try to stay on.
No, that's good. I think that's a good I just want to acknowledge it because
Yeah.
it's in that 10th house. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Okay, so let's just talk about next. Let's just go right to her ascendant and
Mm-hmm.
think about the fact that she's got Virgo rising, and we're going to have to also notice that the moon is there in whole signs in the first house.
Mm-hmm.
But with Virgo rising, what does that tell us about her personality? For one thing, it tells us immediately that the midheaven and the ascendant are both ruled by the same planet, which is Mercury there. So Mercury is really such an important piece in this chart, ruling both the midheaven and the ascendant.
Yeah, and the ascendant in Virgo, that makes a statement about competence, diligence, efficiency, like getting the job done. There's a very implementing type of energy with Virgo. Like you're gonna make a plan and you're gonna execute it. That's kind of what's happening. But Virgo's also concerned with perfectionism and things to do with her appearance. So I think that this is where we see, I mean, nobody ever gets to see Dolly without her makeup and her wig on. And she's very forthcoming about, hey, yes, I've had work done. Yes, I have a makeup. Yes, I have a wig. And it's part of her whole thing. It's not, she doesn't try to hide it. She's not trying to pretend she's someone else. It's just that it's entirely part of her performance and how she shows up in the world. And so the amount of effort that goes into that attention to detail in her appearance is definitely shown here by that Virgo ascendant.
How she presents herself is part of her creative strategy. And you look at that Mercury that rules the ascendant in Capricorn, trining the ascendant, that Mercury is strategizing very creatively how to present who she is.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
I think that's great, Laurie. I like that you pointed out the trine, you know, because I do think that just understanding more about Mercury is going to give you a lot of understanding about Dolly Parton in general. And in a simple sense, it's just whatever she puts her mind to is going to allow her career to take off, and it's going to affect her public image and her personal image. Yeah. And that it ties that really neatly together.
Absolutely. That's, it's so interesting. Yeah. The strategy of how she presents herself. That's so interesting to me.
Right. I know. I like how, I mean, it makes sense to me when I was watching the movie. I mean, I think I kind of maybe had some judgments about her, like, oh, she's had all this plastic surgery and blah, blah, blah. But once I watched the documentary and I really understood that it was just part of the whole thing, and it's not that she's trying to hide behind it. That's not it. No. So I think that I have a better understanding of it. And also an understanding of how important privacy is to Dolly. Like here she is, this huge public person, but no one's ever really seen her husband. There's only a couple snapshots in the documentary we watched. So there's a really a big statement about privacy and keeping that stuff intact.
Yeah. Oh. That is so interesting, isn't it? That's very unusual. Okay. A few things I want to just throw in for those of you that might be interested in this. You know, I don't have the dates of when some of her real high points of her career were, but in 1965 and 66, when Uranus and Pluto came together, they were right on her ascendant. So I suspect that right in that 65, 66 timeframe was a point where she was really in the public eye. And, you know, the connection with the culture that she became famous in is so significant here with the outer planets and how they are interacting with each other in this chart. I just want to just put that little trine there. There is just such an explosion of energy through the cultural times she was born in, that it's tied right into her midheaven. I don't know if I articulated that properly, but it's
no, you did. I just want to corroborate. No, that's when her career started. That 66, 67 was actually a song she wrote. A story is about suicide, which is really intense and not what you think of with Dolly. But that is the beginning. And that's also when she met her husband. I think it was 66, or maybe married him in 66. But the folks that she was starting to, I forget the recording contract, which company it was, but anyway, they were not happy that she was getting married. And so she hid it from them and kept it secret for a year. And the fact that she was able to keep it secret for a year convinced them that it was going to work. And that was when her career really started to go. So just want to corroborate that.
And apparently convinced her that she could keep it secret forever.
I know, right? Like, it's amazing. Like,
that's so interesting. Yeah. And I just want to talk about that Virgo a little bit more here also, just in terms of, you know, Virgo is such an interesting sign in that perfectionism, that creating the self, the way she did it. Virgo, there's such a kindness in Virgo. And I think that's something that is very obvious when you start really understanding who Dolly Parton is, with that moon in Virgo and the ascendant in Virgo. There's such a deep need to be of service and kindness. I think that's really key in understanding her.
Yeah, and I think one of her big things is that she really helps people be seen. I think people hear her music and they completely
Right.
identify with it. At least certainly where she's from. I mean, a huge part of in the southern US, I mean, I think people really identified and she made them feel seen, like that
Right.
she understood. And that's
Right.
also why she wasn't overtly feminist in her attitudes and the way she talked, because she wanted to be approachable to everybody. And she did not want anybody to feel bad. And you can judge that. I mean, it's easy to judge that, and it's okay if you do. But it's also just good to know, like, this is part of what was happening, because when you listen to her songs and you hear the messages in the songs, there's a lot more, I think, feminist power in those songs.
Yeah.
Oh, hmm,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, it's it's quite interesting.
It
Uh,
is. Okay. So, anything else we want to say around that? I guess, yeah, that's how she is of service to others, is by allowing them to see themselves through her songs. Well,
yeah, I think so.
apologize for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
I think, I mean, with the moon in Virgo right there, in that first house, it's a pretty powerful moon too. I mean, the way that she grapples with her own emotional content and works with that right there in that such a visible place is really important. Because if you look at this chart, you realize that right when Dolly was born, there was this big, beautiful full moon that
mm,
just rose.
yeah.
And I mean, it's right above the ascendant there. So it just was just a few minutes since the moon had risen, which is
Yeah.
really awesome.
Yeah, and
To see that visual, right?
it technically was still a
Mhm.
full moon. So
Yes.
that really speaks to, her awareness. To me, that speaks to her awareness of who she was and what she was able to, or would be able to, accomplish. Yeah, she was a kid when she was first on stage and was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And I think that's a real full moon kind of statement there.
Mhm. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Now, you want to talk more about Mercury and pull in that T square?
Yeah, I think it's time to talk about the T square because it's a
Okay.
very dominant feature in her chart, right? And
Yes. First of
we
all,
love the T square. Yeah.
first of all, the Mercury itself is the ruler, like we've said,
Mhm.
of the midheaven and the ascendant. So that's a really, really important planet here. So now that Mercury, along with, yeah, let's see, that Mercury is going to oppose, whoops, excuse me. Let's get that the way it needs to be. Mercury opposes Saturn and Mars in
Mhm.
Cancer in the 11th house, both retrograde. That's a pretty interesting statement. What do you have to say about that, Jennie?
There's a lot to say. I mean, it's
There's a
sort of
lot to say about that.
I mean, it's a little bit complex. I mean, I think let's just start with Saturn and Mars together. I think they even though you're like, geez, that's super intense. It is an intense conjunction, but at the same time it's amazing because it means that you have the power of the accelerator and the brake at your disposal right there. So it really makes a statement about disciplined action, and you can absolutely say that about Dolly Parton, that she knew how to take action, how to be disciplined. So I think that's the first thing to understand about Mars and Saturn together. I mean, Mars is hot and fast, and Saturn is cold and slow. And so
Right.
they actually, when harnessed together, they're extremely effective. The fact that they're both retrograde puts this spin on
That's
it. It puts
interesting.
this kind of wild child spin on it, that they're both, both being retrograde means that they're more in a interior manifestation of the energy. So in other words, the energy is kind of going in and churning around before it can come back out. So it really puts this internal spin on both of those. So it's kind of like she had to really internalize this energy. This is what the chart suggests, and work with that energy and understand how to harness it, which is probably one of the hardest things she did in her younger life, or perhaps consistently throughout her life to make it all work out. So
It's
that,
interesting because that Saturn rules all those planets there in the 5th house as well. So, it's like these two, I love this polarity between the 5th and the 11th, the creativity down here, the structured determination of that, all that Capricorn planets in the area of creativity have to really kind of face off with, okay, well, I've got all this creativity and I have to in order to utilize it, I have to dig into these complicated ways of how I'm going to receive from others, from the community. If you think about this as receiving love and this as giving love, they both are, really linked together. It's like
yeah.
she has all this creativity, and what is she doing with it? She's releasing it in a way that it can come back to her through discipline, through that effort that she has to make. She can create this community that supports her.
Yeah.
Maybe I said that in a rather twisted manner, but
Well, no, I think I can provide an example just to enhance what you're saying. I think essentially what you're saying is kind of like Whitney Houston sung one of her most famous songs, but she made it even, I mean, Whitney Houston took her song, which I think is a song, I'll Always Love You, and made it a superstar song. And I don't know if Dolly, how the contract went, but Dolly letting her sing that song just brought back so much more support and fame for Dolly. So just shows you that release of like, yeah, go, use the song that I created and then how it worked. It kind of shows that polarity.
Yeah, and it also, that makes me think, the Cancer in this 11th house ruled by that moon in Virgo. So that kindness, that being of service, that really enabled her to, I loved it how she said how much she appreciated what Whitney did, how beautiful she thought it was. I don't know why I'm getting all this activity on my phone. I don't. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so anyway, I just wanted to throw that example in there for folks just to think about like that 5th and 11th house and how they work together, this idea of giving through creativity and then the receiving and how it all kind of works together.
She certainly received. She has certainly, her creativity has certainly enabled her to receive an awful lot of adulation from the community, and it all reflects down into, that's very interesting, Jupiter and Chiron in the 2nd house. I think of that as the necessity, her creativity and how she worked with it really brought resources to her. And yet that was where she came from, poverty. So these two are really linked, and so many of her songs were stories of her poverty. So it's almost like that poverty enabled the expansion.
Yeah. It's interesting to think of Jupiter as being, so Jupiter's the planet here that's being squared by all the other ones. And so in that sense, it's kind of like the steering wheel. It's like the steering arm of the T-square. So working with this component is what's going to be extra important, that expansive quality, that ability to open to grace, which is kind of what Jupiter represents. But right next to Chiron, I think you're right, Laurie, I think that definitely does symbolize poverty. The poverty that she grew up in, and that's the wound to work with, to overcome, to share your wisdom with others. I mean, that's what Chiron represents. And as you see by the aspect grid here, there's a lot of stuff going on. Chiron squares all those things. It's conjunct Jupiter. It's trining Uranus.
That's the piece I hadn't really looked at, is that Chiron trines. So the gift of her poverty and how she was able to work with, and kind of expand, with Jupiter expanding the meaning of her poverty and utilizing it to wake up her career and the gift she brought to others. It's fascinating.
You also notice that Jupiter rules both the 4th and the 7th house. So this, to me, makes a comment about her home life. You know, Jupiter, we've already talked about Jupiter ruling that poor home life, but also her hidden husband.
Her
Yes,
hidden husband.
I just feel like there's a huge resource that we all don't get to know as the public. That is a huge sustenance to her. That really provides a behind the scenes expansion that Jupiter represents. So it's kind of, I mean, it shows this kind of sweet spot. I like that
I
about what
wonder
Jupiter
though, I
has.
wonder if that hidden husband, the fact that hidden husband, I
He
wonder
is.
if there's something that's linked in the pain dynamic, the wound dynamic
Mhm.
around that. Because another person, you know, I have not
Sure.
delved into her life in any great way, but
Mhm.
when I listen to her songs, I have a real awareness and a feeling of her female relatives, you know, her mothers and aunts and stuff, but you don't hear anything about her dad either.
No, and she grew up with all boys. She grew up with brothers and uncles, and there's hardly any. I mean, the documentary suggests there's hardly any female figures in her young life. I mean, it's all boys, you know, and even the
And
how
that
she learned music
Mars,
was through her uncle. Oh,
yeah. And that Mars rules the third house. So a lot of brothers. Yeah.
mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
mean, that's a part she's chosen not to show, and there's a couple different ways you can look at that. You can see,
Right.
I mean, even where the moon is located in the chart, which this is a whole sign chart, so it's in the first house, but it's above the ascendant, which is how we know it had risen. But it kind of suggests this. It's like that little pocket. It's not in the 12th house, but it's visible.
Yeah.
But I kind of think of it as being a little bit of a secret to her success, like this moon that everybody can see it, but there's a secret to it because it's also,
Right.
and if you're using a different house system, it would be in the 12th house.
Right.
And so just and that's not important to this video, but I just it kind of lends this idea of it being both beautiful and in full view and yet hidden, and it's just something being held in that
Yeah.
that is how she's been able to succeed with all of these
Yeah.
different things that she's done.
Wow. I love her.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a
I
lot.
really do. And
Um,
I
yeah.
want to mention one other tiny thing. It's not all the most
Mhm.
important thing in the world, but that Neptune trining Mercury is also an interesting component, just bringing
Yeah.
the Neptune music,
Yeah.
songs,
Well, it's
how
actually
her creativity.
it's a square, but it
Oh,
doesn't
is it?
really.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, well, it doesn't. I
Yeah,
mean,
you're
it
fine.
only. In fact, the only reason it matters
Yeah,
is because it gives more energy to it. It
right.
kind of makes that.
Yeah.
I think it helps Mercury out in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well,
Kind
she has to
of
work with
connects
it.
it.
Any, you know, the thing with a square is it's challenging, but it has to be worked with. And
Yeah.
clearly she's worked with it.
Yeah. The only thing we haven't really unpacked yet then is the sun. We haven't really talked
We
about the
haven't
sun.
even talked about
I
the
know.
sun.
I think we can probably finish with that, huh?
Huh. All right, so the sun in Capricorn with Venus right there under the beams, as they say. And that sun rules the 12th house.
Hmm.
There's another piece that may be tucked away
The
as well.
hidden, yeah, that's the other hidden, like that's why I kept thinking of that phrase, like the secret of for success, like the kind of hidden secret of success. Um,
Right.
but I think the sun is barely in Capricorn. It's just very soon going to go
Right.
to Aquarius. So it's the
Yep.
29th degree of any sign is considered to be somewhat unstable because it's reaching towards the next thing. And I think that just slightly underscores the whole Uranus conjunct the midheaven
Mm,
thing we talked about in the beginning.
yep.
The other thing that I think is interesting about the sun is by degree, it's not involved in the T square. I mean, it is by sign, technically,
Right.
but by degree, it isn't. And to me, that showed up as like a little bit of that sun is more free to shine. It's not doing all the heavy lifting of the T
Yeah.
square. It's like it's kind of letting the sun is letting its sort of minions of Venus and Mercury and other planets do the heavy lifting, while it just
Huh.
gets
Oh, I
shine.
love that. That's a great
Yeah.
way to think about
Thank
it.
you. But I just thought that was cool. But I mean, other than that, it's just this profound statement about strategy
Yeah.
and also integrity, right? And
Yeah.
effort.
I remember early on, you know, when I was first looking at famous people's charts back 100 years ago, and always being surprised at how many musicians and entertainers have so much Capricorn,
Mm.
because I always in my mind, I think early on thought of Capricorn as such a solitary thing.
Mm.
But in order to really create a life like Dolly Parton has created, in order to really be famous, you've got to have the ability to strategize.
Yeah.
And that Capricorn, we see so much Capricorn in famous people's charts. You know, I always think, oh, well, musicians, performers should all be all Leo. You know, no, it's not true. They really
No.
need that Capricorn or strong Saturn components. And it's interesting, actually, with Dolly, she does not have any fire in her chart other than, you know, Pluto in Leo. So none of the visible planets are in fire at all, but she's got that determination, the earth. You know, this chart is so much earth, not much of anything else, so much earth and so much cardinal starting up kind of energy. And yeah, the ability to strategize, organize things, and just make things happen from the state of her creativity it's profound in this chart.
One thing I want to comment on too is if you're anybody studying like sort of ancient astrology, because we're doing more psychological astrology, but you would look at that Saturn and Mars together and go, ooh, you know, that's real. I mean, that's bad, or, you know, but it's tough. It's very tough. But it's also, I think, very, very, very important to this chart that she is able to work those two energies together. Because when you think about it, I was thinking it's kind of like a little engine, Saturn, Mars together. You've got the spark that's allowing, you know, giving it the heat, but then you have the structure of, let's say, the piston in the engine. And it's like the two together just really, and they're so tightly together. And the fact that they're both retrograde, there's just some way in which I see this as like this little engine inside a Dolly, like running away, that, and the hard work that has gone into all of her hard work, but also into her own healing, because I think that that symbolizes that for sure, probably through her singing and other things. I think it's a really important thing to notice in the chart. And not that Hellenistic astrology is wrong, it's not, but just thinking about it's the struggle, it's the growth that makes people who they are. It isn't just because they laid around and got lucky, you know?
Right.
No.
Right. Yeah. There's an awful lot in this chart. So is there anything else you want? I mean, we could keep going, but I think we've covered all the main points.
Yeah, no, we've covered a lot of things here today, really. So
Okay.
I hope, well, let's go ahead and stop sharing.
All right, we will stop
All right.
sharing, and we will say, watch, you know, there's many other documentaries about Dolly Parton that you could watch and learn all kinds of things about her. You can get this chart on the internet or wherever.
Yeah,
Or you can
I
just
know,
look
right?
at it where we just printed it or had it up there. So yeah, I'm rambling now. So let's say goodbye. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've
Thank you.
enjoyed this and learned something from it.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thanks, Laurie.
Thanks, Jennie. Bye-bye.
Bye.